Hey, Dr. Sia with you, and I want to re-examine the dangers of chronic cardio. This is a phrase, chronic cardio, and this was coined by some who have concerns about harm from aerobic exercise. And it's plausible, it certainly makes sense. It doesn't feel good when you're pushing yourself too hard for too long. We don't want to. You can feel pain in the heart when you're overworking it. There can be high cortisol levels. Exercise makes oxidative stress. It makes inflammation. It may depress the immune system. It may decrease fat metabolism. It can do all that stuff in the moment. And it's so easy to think that all those things are bad and that therefore cumulative effects of them would be just horrible for the body. And there's been many high-profile cases of athletes who have had sudden cardiac death or other health problems. And so this case has been woven together about exercise being dangerous, something that our ancestors didn't engage in. So let's unpack this. As a generalization, all those things are true. However, they miss the idea of hormesis. So there's the old saying, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? There's almost a dark twist on that, which has been phrased as, that which doesn't kill me makes me weaker. That everything that's a little bit bad is cumulative. And what we now know is that there's a lot of things that are a little bit bad that are helpful, that make us stronger. That's been called anti-fragile. A bridge could hold, making up numbers, you have this bridge that could hold 10 cars or 5 trucks at once, right? So if you've got 20 trucks, the bridge will collapse. But if a bridge were like the human body, and right now it could hold 5 trucks, if we had 4 trucks, on a regular basis, eventually the body could tolerate 6 trucks. And then if we had 5 trucks pretty regularly, we could tolerate 7 or 8, So we're anti-fragile. The things that challenge us, that don't collapse us, make us stronger. So back to that body as bridge, let's say that we could tolerate 8 trucks. That doesn't mean that 80 is good. That doesn't mean that 80 will collapse us. But if we can tolerate 8, and we spend a lot of time with 7, and a little bit of time with 8, then we could tolerate 9 after a while. So that's how our systems work. And yes, exercise does raise inflammation. It does generate oxidative stress. It does shut down the immune system. It does stop fat burning temporarily. But all those things are better when we adapt to exercise. Those are all things we can better accommodate. We have less inflammation. We can better stop our own free radical damage. We have healthier immune responses. We can do a better job burning fat. So all those things that are bad about it are actually good about it. So a little more depth on where this stuff comes from. And some of the harms cited from those arguing about the dangers of chronic cardio, many talk about one particular study showing that a group of marathon runners had higher coronary artery calcium scores. You can take a high-speed CT of the coronary arteries and see if there's calcium present. And by and large, that does predict cardiovascular disease. And this study has been held up quite commonly to say that those who train a lot damage their hearts. Now, interesting thing was that on closer analysis, it was noted that more than half of the marathoners in this study were former smokers, like really intense smokers. So once you looked at them in the full context, their cardiovascular risk scores, their level of plaque, it fit. Exercise is a positive factor, but this group had a large amount of negative factors. But there's even more depth to it than that. It turned out that they did have visible plaque. However, on further analysis, they had lower than expected risks of cardiovascular events. So they had a marker of heart disease, but they didn't actually get heart disease. So yeah, that wasn't really proof that it was a harmful thing. The other data point has been about the immune response. And there's been several studies showing that those who participate in large events like Ironman triathlons or marathons are more apt to have respiratory infections after the events. And that's been thought of as being proof about the event and the effort you put out weakening your immune system. And it's plausible enough, you train hard, you kick your butt in the competition and you're wiped out. And it seems intuitive that maybe your immune system is wiped out too. Maybe you were vulnerable. And arguably that could be a bad thing. But on closer scrutiny, let's think about this. So you go to a big event, and there's a lot of variables. One of those variables is the fact that you exert a massive amount of your body's energy, that you wear yourself out. So that's there. But other variables, well, you travel, so you're around a lot of folks, to do that. And you change your time zones often, and you're getting up early for the event, you're sleeping in a strange place, so your sleep is disrupted. You're maybe not on the same foods, but a lot of factors are there that can also explain upper respiratory illness. So a further study wanted to compare what happens to someone who goes and runs a marathon versus someone else who goes to a convention. So you go to Las Vegas, you go to a trade show, and you've got a lot of those same variables. You don't exercise that hard, you don't exert your body to that same level, but you travel, you change time zones, you're around a whole bunch of strangers, and it turns out that those who go to a convention have even a higher rate of respiratory infection than those that travel for a marathon or an Ironman. So it's not that exercise makes your immune system weak, it's that being in a big group and traveling and all those things make you more apt to catch a bug. And if anything, the exercise probably is helpful for that. And I really want to convey, because I've talked to so many people who are just terrified of exercise. I can think of several that I've spoken to recently to where it was a big love of theirs. They really enjoyed aerobic activities, running, cycling, training, endurance sports. And yet they heard about these bad things of chronic cardio. And in their overall efforts, trying to help their body do better, they thought it was best if they cut back. They thought it was best if they stopped participating in those things. And they gave up things that were a big love that they had. And in its absence, they found that they didn't have as much energy, they couldn't manage their weight as well, but they thought they were doing something healthy. They thought they were hurting themselves with all that training, and so they stopped it. And that's why I'm here doing this video, because it's just not true. One more point to mention about possible harm. So troponin. Troponin is a marker that shows up in your blood when heart cells are damaged. So if a man in his 50s who was heavy showed up in an ER with chest pain, they would measure his troponin levels. And if they were high, they would really think he was having a heart attack. So there have been studies showing that endurance athletes in the midst of a real hard training bout have high troponin levels. And many have thought, wow, they're damaging their hearts. They're doing heart damage right in this moment. But we now know that the troponin, it's a marker of cell turnover, but in the context of training, it doesn't correlate with heart damage. There's no relationship with cardiac outcomes like heart attacks. That there's no risk above what you would see for controls. So if those bad things aren't bad, what do we know about athletes? Whenever we're thinking about things, you can think about things in terms of a model, like this might happen. But you can also think about things in terms of what did happen. And that's more meaningful. So what has happened? Do endurance athletes have more chronic disease? Do they die younger? Do they have all these fearful complications that those warning about chronic cardio, do those things actually happen to people? Or is that just the sky falling? Well, here's what we know so far. So in terms of life expectancy, we see that endurance athletes, they have a life expectancy of 2.8 to 8 years longer than non-athletes. So big difference. We also see that overall life expectancy correlates in a good way with more exercise. One big data point, this is a cool one, this came from a running club of those in Northern California. It was a Stanford running club. And they compared longevity, but also disability to a large group of people, 538 members versus 423, pretty much the same types of demographics, the same age, the same area, the same socioeconomic status over a large number of years, like 84 to 2004. So what? So 16, so yeah, like 20 year duration. And what they saw was that the survival and also the disability was clearly advantaged of those who were doing running all the time, most days. They were less apt to be disabled and they were more apt to survive than their peers were by obvious differences. So yeah, clear distinction in this group. Now, we also had a really good study of 2,600 Finland athletes, and they were broken down into power athletes, so mostly like lifting sports, team athletes, so that's like the ball stuff, your baseball, basketball, hockey, those sorts of things, and then endurance athletes. And what they saw is that when you compared this group to pretty much the same size, the same number of similar people, all the athletes lived a whole lot longer. And of all the athletes, the endurance athletes had the greatest benefits. So the power athletes lived about 1.5 years longer, the team sport athletes lived about 4 years longer, and the endurance athletes lived almost 6 years longer. So all the athletes did better, and the endurance athletes did the best. And why would that be? Well, a big study in 2001 showed that our ability to utilize oxygen is one of the biggest factors determining how likely we are to have early death and complications of that. And this study showed that our VO2 max, our efficiency of oxygen, was one of the biggest drivers of dying at a given age. And endurance athletes were training our VO2 max. That's what we get better at. So this study looking at death risk showed that similar thing, endurance athletes had a 43% lower risk of death. Team athletes did better than controls as well. They had a 33% lower risk of death. And strength training athletes, they also did better. They had a 10% lower risk of death. But again, endurance sports were the greatest benefits of all. There's an image here that explains how endurance sports act upon morbidity versus mortality. So mortal, we're mortal, we're going to die. Mortality is death. Morbidity is getting disease. And disability. So morbidity is getting old and frail, basically. And what we see is that this has been called the compression of morbidity theory. So those who are physically active, they'll have a later death. Now, if all you did was extend life, the top of this image shows the normal pattern to where morbidity comes on at a certain age. You've got these years of morbidity, which is that triangle, and then you've got death. So if you just were to extend life, you would have more years, but also more years of which you're old. And I hear people say things like this, like, I don't want to live forever. I don't want to be old for a long time. And that's valid. You don't want more years of morbidity. You don't want more poor quality years. You want a longer health span. So on the bottom of this slide, this is what endurance athletics does for people. It does expand our lifespan, but it compresses our morbidity years. So we stay young longer. We still will die, and we still will have some complications of aging, but they will happen to us later on, and we'll get more years total. So now here's a great one too, is how much exercise is best? How much is helpful? At what point does it become dangerous? Well, a lot of the popular recommendations say, do 150 minutes per week. And there's an image showing that all-cause mortality, that little amount has a big difference. That does cut the all-cause quite a bit. But where does it become dangerous? And when do you worry about doing too much exercise? Here's an image from an excellent book called Exercised by Daniel Lieberman. And he shows how the minutes per week of cardio, our chronic cardio, correlates with risk of all-cause mortality, how likely we are to die. So what we see, this is that 150 minutes per week right about here. And this is a great big drop. This is a big drop from baseline. This is cutting it by roughly almost half. So that's wonderful. But it gets better and it gets better. So here we are now at 700 minutes per week, and we're seeing about a 20% risk of all-cause death, meaning 5 times less likely to die from any cause. So 700 minutes per week, easy math, that's about 100 minutes per day. That's more than most are getting. And it keeps getting better. He actually explained how this little blip up at 1900 is probably an artifact, but we're totally flatlined here at 1500 minutes per week. So 1400 minutes per week, easy math, 200 minutes per day. So 3 hours per day, and we've nearly flatlined the relative risk for absolute death. So there's not a point at where suddenly this risk goes up. Many have an idea that if you exercise too long, it raises your risk more than it would if you didn't exercise. That exercise has like a J-shaped curve where too much of it becomes harmful or dangerous. And there certainly could be a point to where if you're diving into it, if you're doing way more than you're accustomed to abruptly, that it's a stress for your body. But if you're not diving into it, if you're adapting to it over time, have fun and don't be frightened. Please know that the differences between the benefits of, say, like 500 versus 700, these are not huge differences. So if you're someone who doesn't exercise, please know that every bit you do will have a huge benefit upon helping you live longer and have a better health span as well, having less years of morbidity. But if you are exercising now and having fun and you're thinking about doing more, don't be afraid of that. Please don't think that more exercise will be harmful for you. The data does not show that. So there are times to where athletes have risks, but they're not different than they would be if they weren't athletes. And in almost all cases, those risks are lower. So some general thoughts: if you are sick, if you've got a respiratory infection, don't train hard. That can strain your body. That can be counterproductive. And also think about, your life's goals, your priorities. I've had times to where I've compressed a lot. There was a time in which I was a serious amateur cyclist, and I was training for probably 20 hours a week. And I did that as I was also doing my best to be a good father, a good husband, a good doctor, a good leader to my associates. And it was a lot to juggle. So it wasn't that the training was dangerous, but it was just a lot to compress in my days. And that by itself became stressful. So think about the big context of your life, your schedule, your priorities. But please know that exercise is good for you. And there's not some point at where it becomes dangerous. And please know that the stories about chronic cardio are honestly not congruent with science. It's probably the exact opposite of the truth. All right, Dr. C with you. Maybe I'll see you out on the trails. Otherwise, take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.